Welcome to today's webinar, Cyber-Insecurity, How to Secure Your Systems Against a Hack Attack, ISO IEC 27001. This webinar is sponsored by Omnex. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief of Quality Digest and your host for today's webinar. Almost daily, we hear reports of companies' information systems being hacked into or data being stolen. Cybersecurity, one area of information security, is now mandatory for automotive organizations. Additionally, the U.S. government has mandated NIST 800-171 and NIST 853 for companies supporting the Department of Defense and will soon include civilian agencies. Because information security is so important, certification to ISO IEC 27001 has become critically important as well. In this webinar, you will learn how NIST standards and ISO 27001 integrate and how they can become part of a successful ISO 27001 implementation. You're also going to learn how to handle the top audit issues companies face with ISO 27001 and the important differences between cybersecurity product standards and IT security standards. All right, let's get started. Today's presenter is Chad Kymal, CTO and founder of Omnex Incorporated. Over the course of his career, Chad has served on the Malcolm Baldrige Board of Examiners and has received numerous quality achievement awards, including the Quality Professional of the Year Award by the American Society for Quality Automotive Division, and that was in 2005. Chad both developed and teaches auditor training for ISO 9001, IATF 16949, ISO 14001, and OSAS 18001, ISO 45001, as well as an integrated management systems lead auditor training course that pulls all that together. Okay, Chad, it's all yours. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dirk. Welcome, everyone, to the webinar, Cyber-Insecurity, How to Secure Your System Against a Hack Attack, which really we're going to focus on how ISO 27001 is able to be used to help you in this defense in terms of what's happening. So let's take a look at what is going on. Folks, by the way, this webinar is being sponsored by Omnex. We're a company that was established in 1985, so for about 34 years. We do all different kinds of management systems training, and of course something like 27001 really fits what Omnex does, because as you may or may not know, we have a whole technology company and Omnex Systems, which is our sister company. Just to remind you, our company, Omnex Systems, has a solution suite with both supplier quality, management systems, and APQP solutions. Of course, we are very much a global organization. All right. So here we go then, and let's take a good look at what today is all about. This is the agenda. We'll start with the the need for information security, and I'll share with you some of the things I shared in my article I wrote for Quality Digest. In fact, we'll start with the 18 biggest, largest cyber attacks that have taken place, and we'll take a look at some of the statistics, and I hope you feel like I do in terms of some of the gravest danger we all face is really this cybersecurity and the need to defend ourselves. So one of the things I'll tell you is that cybersecurity is part of information security, and I'll cover that for you in the overview of 27001. And then we'll talk about something called a high-level structure and an integrated management structure. Next, we'll look inside the standard for context, interested parties, the scope, the process approach. Then, of course, a very important part of ISO 27001 is the risk treatment and controls, which is sort of the heart of the, how information security risk is treated inside each organization. So we'll take a good look at that and understand how, how you have to handle that in 27001, and then we'll look at the implementation overview of how to get started. All right, let's start here for the need for ISO 27001 information security. And this is what I mentioned to you when I introduced the agenda. These are the top 18 cybersecurity attacks. Take a look at this, folks. This should really scare us. Right from Yahoo losing 3 billion accounts all the way, to Adobe losing 38 million, and keeping in mind the population of the U.S. is 300 million. Can you imagine insurance information, our financial information, though the exact financial information didn't get stolen with JP Morgan, but look at the amount of information that these hackers are gathering, and they're able to get a very good profile of who we are. So keeping in mind what's happening with all this is that they're continually stealing more and more records. So here is 12 billion that in 2018, with the data jumping up to 33 billion in 2023. So what happens? They're able to put together this from various entities, our names, addresses, credit card information, and social security numbers. How it's going to be used in the future, my own prediction is it's not just for financial, to make money off our accounts and our names, but it's also, if you look at the attacks and the breaches coming from both China and Russia, this information could be, for multiple different purposes in the future. So about half of these data breaches occur in the USA. Oh, let me do that fast. So along with this theft, the loss of identity theft, you can see the amount of billions of dollars that are being stolen. Yes, indeed, we're losing a lot of money, but there's more vicious and malicious things that can happen to us as a country, with this in mind. And what we'll do is we'll take a look at what the SEC has to say about it a little bit later. All right, so incredible amount of information being hacked into, identity theft, and let's look and see what organizations say. 38% of the organizations globally say they're prepared to handle a sophisticated cyber attack. My own feeling, looking around and looking at the customers Omnex deals with, I think 38%, though very small, is still quite big in terms of, I don't quite know if 38% of the organizations we're dealing with truly have a good defense against cyber attacks. And by the way, over half the companies are saying they're experiencing one or more attacks in the last 12 months. And then the total cost of cybercrime has risen to $1 trillion. So let's see what IBM's chairperson has to say. The cybercrime is the greatest threat to every company in the world. And when you really think about it, she's absolutely right. With evolving technology, we're getting a new set of people coming in as hackers, and continually we're left behind in terms of technology. So we really have to stay up to snuff in terms of being trained, having solutions, and in all parts of the company. Now, I'm not quite sure if we truly understand what we need to do for cybersecurity. Is it a technological solution? Is it an IT solution? Or is it a company-wide solution? Okay, let's wait and take a good look. I have just 2 more slides on this need for information security. This is something I thought was absolutely scary. I'll just remind ourselves that the Democratic National Committee got hacked. The IRS got hacked. And what they're saying especially about that IRS hack, is that it was done the sophistication level of that attack was very low. And yet, the IRS really could not, prevent this information security lapse. And I already mentioned JP Morgan to you. And then we have the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, where 21.5 million records of those who had undergone government background checks or applied for the federal employment, their, personal information was lost. So you can get some ideas here in terms of where some of these attackers are focusing, what they might do as a next step. All right. By the way, just to keep in mind that most of the origin of the attacks are actually via email, and that's the scariest part, folks. And how many of you are not getting these phishing emails? I'm told maybe that I'm getting attacked. By the way, I get anywhere from 5 or 6 to a dozen phishing emails every day. I'm told, the root cause is maybe the position in the company, and number 2, I have access to a number of outward-facing, like info at Omnex and things like that I keep tabs on, and I'll tell you, Omnex itself is, we have started implementing ISO 27001, and we'll be going for certification this year. There's a ton of information we learned, including, I fell victim to one of the phishing attacks where I clicked an email I shouldn't have clicked. And without knowing that if I just go into this website, here's what you should know, folks. If you're onto a website that you shouldn't be, they're able to download a worm into your email account. And this can stay dormant in your system for the longest time till it needs to get activated. So, when I look at this is why I added the second bullet there, that we're as vulnerable as the weakest link in our company. I hope, I have just sort of, I think we all need to get scared. And I hope this information truly, gives us impetus for change. And really, I'll mention this to you in the very end of this webinar, we need to start with top management. All right, but here, we'll start with the question, what is information security? So people like to say information security is CIA. And what they mean by that is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Of course, information security is much more than cyber attacks, right? It also wants to make sure the information is there, when we need it. The information, it's available. And number 2, the integrity of the data is there, right? So as we go through from ISO 27001, I have to mention NIST, the 800 series, which is a set of free to download documents managed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So looking at the different attacks that have happened on, to the U.S. government, there are two standards that are being applied. SB 853, which is very comprehensive, and a SB 800-171 that has got half the number of controls as 256. So in this webinar, now and later, I'll mention the NIST SB 800 series are very nicely and neatly integrates into the ISO 27001. What ISO 27001 has, it has a management system, and it explains how these controls can be integrated into the organization, whereas the 853 and 800-171 are just about controls. So you may or may not know how exactly to go about in terms of putting a management system in place. All right. So what is this information security management system? Well, here's the definition from 27001, that an ISMS preserves the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information by applying a risk management process that gives confidence to interested parties that risks are adequately managed. And I'll also say, it's part of a management system, and this is the definition about this management system, that is a set of interrelated or interacting elements of an organization. So you can expect that ISO 27001 looks for information security management system policy, objectives, and then processes to implement these controls. So you can get a picture. Now I imagine that in the audience today, that we have people who are experienced in management system, and maybe we also have people with just an IT background who quite don't know what we mean by a management system, right? So part of this management system is policies, objectives, and of course processes to implement these objectives. And folks, these processes are the ones that, where you have to apply the information security controls also. All right, let's move on. So here it is, ISO 27001. There's a 27000 which has vocabulary, definitions in it. For those of you who know ISO 9001, the ISO IEC 27000 is like 9000 in that it has the definitions, right? 27001 has the mandatory requirements or shalls in them. And then what you see is guidance documents, implementation guidelines, measurement guidelines, risk management guidelines. And then you see in 27006, requirements for third-party audit and certification, and overview and vocabulary in 27007. So what you really have are just two requirements documentations, standards, 27001 and 27006, the rest being guidance. All right. So what does 27001 say about itself? Well, that ISMS consists of policies, procedures, guidelines, and associated resources and activities collectively managed by an organization in the pursuit of protecting its information assets. So that's how they look at themselves. That's a systematic approach for establishing, implementing, operating, monitoring, reviewing, maintaining, and improving the organization's information security to achieve business objectives. Well, okay. I'm just going to cut that short by saying it is a plan, do, check, act to help us achieve the objectives of information security. And third, it is based on risk assessment and risk acceptance levels designed to effectively treat and manage risks. So I'll tell you a little bit of Omnex's own journey and the kinds of things we ourselves learned about, the kinds of security risks we have and the kinds of things we have to do to manage it, right? So 27,000 has got fundamentals and vocabulary. So the way you think about it is that the terms referenced in 27,001 is as the definition in 27,000, okay? And that's how you need to look at it. And that's why there's this word called normative, which means it's mandatory. It's mandatory to use the definitions of 27,000 when you implement 27,001. You know what? I thought this is a good juncture to maybe take a little breather and ask a few questions. Number one, ISO 27001, it's clear, isn't it? It's a practice for the IT department. And that information security is primarily a technology, can't even say that, implementation. Dirk, I know, since you and I have talked about it, I think you yourself may have some questions in terms of what is ISO 27001, and in fact, we may just think it's something we do that the IT department does as a technology solution. Here was Omnex's #1 highest risk. Believe it or not, it is contractors using their own laptops. And without knowing what, and they may or may not have had a protection for their laptops, and hence, coming into Omnex's systems, they could easily bring in various kinds of, issues that could affect us adversely. That was what our team that look at the highest risk, may not be something we thought about, but it was the #1 item. Number two.
And Chad, if I can jump in real, because you said something there I think was critical. Obviously, the questions you have here are rhetorical. Everybody's thinking that, well, yeah, this is security. I'll let my IT guys handle all that, so on and so forth. But kind of what you're pointing out is that very often it's just practices. It's just simple things like people, like you mentioned, you did it yourself, clicking on an email that you shouldn't click on.
I did that with full knowledge. I shouldn't do it. I don't know why I did it, but I did it.
Yep. I think we've all done that, and I think that's what's really clear about all this is that this is just so. This gets down to just what people do, and it's not just IT, although there is a technical side of that. It's what you and I do. It's
the technology people can do everything they can do. Let me tell you another risk we had. We go into hotels. We're traveling all the time, and you know me, Dirk. I'm traveling all over the place, and I'm using the public Wi-Fi. That's a high risk. Yeah. Because a number of things could come into your computer and or your data could get stolen. And so what is the answer? You have to use a VPN no matter where you travel in the world. It could be in the US, it could be in China, you have to do it. Omnex's customer, Micron, I don't know if Micron's had a pretty serious problem with an unknown country I won't mention, because we do a lot of business there. And they had their IP stolen. So what do? They don't allow their employees to take a laptop into this country. Wow. In fact, I use this laptop as a good example of the kinds of risks that can happen with laptops a little later. So it opens our eye to the practices we have. So what is another email? Email is another big issue for us. And it's simple as people changing their passwords. And how difficult the password is. If you have a password that doesn't have at least 8 characters, it doesn't have a capital and a lowercase, doesn't have number, doesn't have a symbol, you are primed for the picking. And that's why I said we're only as strong as our weakest link. The IT departments can go to any great length. I'm not going to tell you the other two, but the point I wanted to make is that technology, we do have to implement a number of technological things inside the company, and we're in the process of doing so. But it came from looking at the risk assessment we did for ourselves, and also coming to the realization that we are extremely vulnerable, and we're as vulnerable as the weakest link. I am, along with everybody else, I don't know if you're starting to see, I'm starting to see this when my email goes into my customer, that's actually a warning that says, warning that this is from outside the company. Yes, we all have to do business with people outside the company, but we have to be really careful. In fact, somebody got an email from Chad Kymal that said something about transferring XYZ money from this bank account to that bank account. Luckily, she knew I would not send an email like that. So you get the picture. We have to be really careful. And so this information security is not a specialty practice, and there are some processes specific to ISMS, but most of the other processes are the way we do design, the way we do work, the rest of the processes of how we do our day-to-day business has to be practiced with information security in mind. That's the main message I want to sort of pose here, but we have a lot more to go. We have at least another half of the webinar to go. Dirk, we wanted to talk about 3 different standards that's worth talking about. Number 1, ISO 9001:2015, and most of the companies in the world are ISO 9001:2015. Thank God for that, because that means you can build on this ISO 9001:2015 with the 27001, which is also a risk-based, process-based standard like 9001. In fact, we should have said risk-based to both of them. Third, another very good standard is a guidance standard we often use when we look at 27001. It's a Cybersecurity Guidance Standard 27032. All right, so 3 standards that fit nicely well and that can be applied to the organization's processes. And so this is what I was saying, that the control. So we're going to see that there needs to be a risk assessment, a risk analysis, and then an implementation of those controls. Yes, indeed, those are brand new processes, but guess what, folks? They have to be applied in the existing organizational business processes. It needs to be integrated here. That's why 9001 is really important, and that is also why the IT department, and this is what is happening, and this is what we really, the IT department needs to realize, they should not be inventing this by themselves. They shouldn't be in a silo creating all these processes and the risk, because it needs to be practiced by the entire company and needs to be implemented where its work is being done. All right. What are the benefits of ISMS? Reduction in security incidents. Of course, we hope. That's why we're doing it. And you know what? We don't even want one incident. Giving confidence to interested parties. Yes, if you are supplying the DoD, the implementation of the 853 It is giving them confidence that you're not going to get hacked in, but in which case the DoD will get hacked in through some sort of portal. Protection of brand and reputation. Can you guess? I mean, I am very disappointed. Well, I I don't want to decry any brand name here, but a certain, I'm a privileged member of a certain, hotel chain who has been hacked, and they lost hundreds of millions of names. I mean, my name, my address. Every time I stayed with them, probably a couple of my bank, my credit card accounts are all stolen, right? And yes, that's not good, and I'm shame on them. And I have not gotten a good apology yet from the CEO. I haven't even heard an acknowledgement that they've lost it. Hey, maybe you need to snip up your credit cards. What else is ISMS? It is definitely a competitive advantage. I am convinced any one of us could get hacked, folks. That's how scared I am inside Omnex. I'll tell you what else I'm doing to prevent, this risk. Reduction in financial losses, consistency across the organization. Dirk, there's one more thing we did. I looked at the highest, most valued assets of the organization, and I'm going to completely take it off the internet. It's going to be in a server, where it's not going to be connected to anything, because I am absolutely convinced anything else will get hacked. Technology is changing, and the hackers are getting more and more sophisticated, and it's just a matter of time. Plus, I don't think we have the wherewithal. We're busy trying to sell training, trying to come up with, with good projects to help our, customers. That's what Omnex is focused on. We're not focused on staying on top, of every different kind of cyber attack. So there's lots of worries top management should have, CEOs should have, CTOs should have. All right, continuing on, we have the going on with 27001 for those of us technically who have to implement it. There's something called a high-level structure and the idea of integrated management systems. So I mentioned to you 27001 is a set of 6 or 7 different standards, 2 of them being requirements. This 27001, which is the requirement we have to implement, is broken up into scope, normative references, terms and definition, and then it follows. For those of you who know the high-level structure, will say, yes, it follows ISO Annex SL, context of the organization, leadership, planning, support, and so on. So this common ISO format, by the way, since I sit on several of the different TCs, technical committees, for ISO 9001, 14001, 45001, and 13485, I do know Annex SL is currently being revised, all right? But this Annex SL, or this high-level structure, forces or requires a common format, for different management system standards. Common terms, common definition, identical core text, and numbering schemes. And I think this is good, and it'll really help organizations easily understand these different management system standards. So here it is. This ISO 27001 follows the structure of ISO 9001. Why? Because both of them follow the high-level structure. And I'm not going to repeat myself. So you see here a couple of different pages here that goes from clause 4.0 context all the way to continual improvement or improvement. Folks, I'm going to pause here, allowing you to write questions. So, I especially wanted to talk about context and interested parties and the idea of scope, just to talk about the relevance of these topics, which are some of the same titles as ISO 9001. How is it different? How does it help, with ISO 27001? So just remind ourselves what is context and understanding the organization as context. So what it does is it identifies what it calls internal issues and external issues relevant to information security, okay? So it's not about quality, it's not about health and safety, but what are the key issues affecting information security? So what would it be for Omnex? For Omnex, maybe that we have some of our key partners are also, who want to be quite independent. In fact, even if we give them full-time work, they want to be independent contractors. It's a context of our business that we really, it comes up much more importantly for information security. What else? That we are globally, placed globally, and we're in some of the high-risk countries, especially for hacking, right, and cyber attacks. So in this fashion, what we'll need to do is identify the external context and the internal context as it affects information security. So let's look at this company A and company B. So what could we say? That the design in company A, being in Atlanta, Georgia, is an advantage, whereas in company B, it's distributed in multiple different countries, and this information will have to be shared between these different entities, allowing a lot more risk in company B for design. Look at the plants. Look at the customers, suppliers, employee travel. What is travel important? I think I mentioned to you how we have to be super, super careful with what intellectual property we take when we travel. Work habits of employees, working at the office versus working at home. Competitors, right? With the idea that there are ruthless competitors sometimes who can act with no impunity in certain countries that can come and take your IP. So who is at a greater risk profile here? I think all of you might look at it and say there's risk in company A, but company B has much more risk. Then the idea of interested parties, that we need to identify what are the interested parties and what are the interested party requirements. And when you look at interested parties, really it's customers, suppliers, employees, regulatory competitors. Yes. And if you do supply the government and it's one of your interested parties, you have to keep in mind the idea of the NIST standards. In many ways, we have to be very proud of what the government has done and the leadership coming from the government. And, they had to, because they were getting attacked severely. And for a national interest, they had to come up with these NIST standards. Folks, I can't, stop but say we all need to do the same. But in the idea of those interested parties, the big point we had to make is they would have to also consider the NIST standards, one of the two of the NIST standards, all right? All right, scope. So here's where they have to determine what is the scope of the implementation. Does it cover travel, working from home, supplier access to portals, customer access to portals? What is it? Of course, we need to really, folks, keep the scope large so we can identify all the different types of risk. If we scope it narrowly just to get certified, it would be the wrong approach to take. So what else can we say? That in this as we look at the context, the interested parties, this standard, the 27001 management system, also says use the process approach. And folks, when we say the process approach, you already saw the process map, right? And the idea that there's management of processes and the interaction to achieve the overall information security policy and the strategic direction. There's also a Plan, Do, Check Act, which I'll show you in a second, and the idea of use of the process approach in terms of meeting requirements, consideration of processes, looking at value added in the processes, achievement of the process performance. So processes have multiple different metrics. One of these metrics for important key processes with information security is also some sort of information security goal or measure. And then, of course, improvement of processes based on valuation of data and information. So this idea of the process approach is mandatory for ISO 27001. Just remind you a little bit, coming from ISO 9001, the idea of a process, that you can see that it's a process is a bunch of activities with a starting point and an ending point with inputs and an output, right? Then, of course, there are sources of the inputs, receivers of the outputs. And the whole idea of the process is to control it with measurement, performance, and monitoring. So what do we recommend? What does Omnex recommend? One of the titles of this chapter was the idea of this, the integrated management systems approach. So we recommend, and this is what we have done for ourselves, folks. Last year, we were always ISO 9001. Last year, we put in environmental management systems and health and safety and social responsibility. So if you've been following us, it was right around 2006, and I actually wrote that article first for Quality Digest, Dirk, where we call it Juggling Multiple Standards, and it was a staple article for us, and in terms of integrating 9001 and 14001. And then we said, right, for the longest time, 9001, 14001, and it was OSHA's 18001, which is 45001. So I'm saying so many different standards here. But really, we said integrate QMS, EMS, and OSHA's. Today, we say integrate all three of those, social responsibility and IT security. And I hope everybody is really cognizant now why we say IT security. So this is what we did for ourselves. Dirk, you had wanted to mention something?
Oh, no, I was just agreeing with you. That was a really good article.
Thanks,
the one you
Dirk.
just mentioned, the integration.
Thank you. And really, that was what many years I'd been saying I'd write a book on it. And finally, 2 years ago, we released a book on integrated management system. But folks, the book talks about not 9,000, QMS, EMS, OSHA's in 5 different industries. But of course, now we have sort of upped the ante in terms of what we need to do. So anyway, you got to integrate around the process map. It's the same set of processes, whether you're doing quality or environmental, health and safety, or IT security, it's the same set of processes. Processes are owned by process owners. Process owners are the business owners of a transactional process. And of course, the IT, the information security requirements, are integrated into the common business processes. May pick up speed here a little bit. Looking at some of these processes we need to, one of them is leadership. What does it tell leadership? It tells leadership that they have to demonstrate leadership and commitment to the information security management system. And number two, that's actually a longer list. This is just the two we wanted to bring into place. Just to say that, you know, this integration we're talking about is actually a requirement. Look at this. Ensuring the integration of information security management system requirements into the organization's processes. That's what I wanted to say here. All right. So this is the last section we're going to talk about before we talk about implementation. A very important section on risk treatment and controls. Folks, I hope this slide is not too busy for you. You see the four blue clauses? Those are the four clauses very specific into the risk management for IT. You need all of them, but these four are specific to IT security risk. One of them talks about, 612, talks about information security risk assessment, and then it says you need to come up with a treatment in terms of controlling the risk. And then you implement it in clause 8. 8.2, the operation 8 itself talks about implementing the risk controls. Then there's a risk assessment and information security risk treatment. All right? Those are the four clauses coming into play which are unique to IT security. So what do we have here? What we see here is that, along with that risk treatment and risk assessment, you have to assess it and look at it in terms of these 100+ security control clauses. So it's a section called Annex A, and Annex A has these different categories. And the rule is that you have to either apply these controls or something equivalent, or you'll have to explain why you haven't implemented it. By the way, this is also where the NIST requirements, not just 171, NIST 153 or 171 can be nicely integrated into this. So Omnex itself is looking at NIST 800-171, and I've asked the team to integrate that in to our Annex A for ISO 27001. All right. Here is continuing on with the idea of leadership. The top management and line managers with relevant roles must demonstrate genuine effort to engage people in the support of ISMS. And it talks about, this clause talks about top management commitment with enhanced levels of leadership, involvement, cooperation in terms of ISMS. Folks, those of you who are looking at it just as an IT security, all of you know, without top management support, we're not going to be able to really implement information security, in a proper fashion inside the organization. So what does top management have to do? They have to make sure the information security policy and objectives align with each other and with the overall strategic policies of the business. So this is where I want to talk a little bit about controls. And I am running out of time. So I wish we had a little bit more time to talk about this laptop that needs to have control. And there are 5 different areas that it could affect theft, right? It's an unattended device, and we gave you 2 different clauses of Annex A. One is unattended user equipment, and number 2, securing offices, rooms, and facilities. Third, acceptable use of assets. All 3 of these come into play for the category unattended device, with and lack of this control leads to theft. Number two, impersonation, where somebody enters the system as though they are you. Two things: weak passwords or, loss of ID credential. Somehow you lose the ID credential, maybe because of maybe you haven't updated your password for a long time. Third, malicious software. How? You have outdated software. Maybe you didn't come back into the office for weeks. You didn't update your laptop, or you don't have any good process in place for that. And really, what do you do with it? Annex A has controls against malware and installation of software and operational systems. Let me just sort of jump all the way to, let me look at one that wouldn't be really obvious, but remember, this is an information security and the availability of information. So they're talking about the laptop malfunctioning. One is because of malicious software. Second is bad maintenance or incompatible software. I'll just stop here just to tell you one little device like laptop, how many different ways, the kinds of risk you can have and how you could have different types of controls. I hope this is a good illustration of risk controls. Folks, what do we have to do? Well, what we have to do is we have to do an assessment, looking at the requirements, your external and internal issues. Remember I told you it comes out of context, as well as the needs and expectation of interested parties. You have to do an assessment process to identify your top risks for CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And I mentioned to you in our assessment, it came down to 5 different things, from contractors using software to something I didn't mention before. Data transfer for large files was a big issue. And because we didn't have a good way to do that, everybody was using multiple different ways to do that, including FTP sites, which are not, are easily compromised. So number one, identify your highest risks. So what do they say? A risk assessment process should be defined that identifies risks associated with the CIA. Each risk needs to have an owner. And then also for this risk, you have to come up with the likelihood or the probability of its occurrence, as well as impact, right? And always risk is impact times likelihood. And then, of course, you put a control in place, and then you put residual risk. So the first part of it is identifying the risk and coming up with the controls necessary to treat the risk. You have to compare these controls with Annex A and make any justifications for inclusions and exclusions, and then you have a formal risk treatment plan, right? This comes from Section 6 in the standard. So here's how we need to think about, Annex A. It's a guidance, but if it's applicable, you cannot ignore it. All right. So let's move on here. Implementation steps for ISO 27001. Folks, here is also where, another very important piece of information. Let's look at this. U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission came up with a guidance, I believe it was April 2018. This is what they said. Cybersecurity risks pose grave threats to investors, capital markets, and our country. Whether it is for companies in which investors invest, their accounts with financial services firms, the markets through which they trade, or the infrastructure, the investing public. So the public and the U.S. economy depend on the security and reliability of information and communications technology systems and network. And they said something else. Today, the importance of data management and technology to business is analogous to the importance of electricity and other forms of power in the past century. Dirk, I really like this. It's worth repeating again that data management and technology is analogous to electricity and other forms of power, right? And what they have told top management that they have to do is they have to put policies and procedures related to cybersecurity risks and incidents. So it is not optional anymore. It's really a requirement for companies traded that they have to follow, you know, a cybersecurity methodology and process. So what we would recommend to people, to organizations to do is implement ISO 27001 and use Annex A to put your controls in place. If you're supplying the government, you can include NIST controls when you're applying Annex A. So what do we recommend? The company board needs to get involved and provide oversight and responsibilities. The SEC guidance has asked for a description of how the board administers the risk oversight. 27,000 requires both internal audits and external audits. So I won't repeat the rest of what's on there. You'll get a copy of this presentation, and you can look in detail. We have also hidden a few slides. You can take a look at all the slides we have hidden. But let me also say this. Implementing 27,000 and getting a third-party certificate is not enough. Remember this, folks. Cybersecurity is an evolving technology. We have a number of different folks, all the governments and individuals, all they're doing is trying to come up with newer and newer methods to try to break into our systems. So because of that, these controls and processes need to be updated all the time. As a place to start, we recommend that top management be provided an executive overview along with their board. So here are the steps we think. You know, create an implementation leader, a steering committee, conduct your context, interest party expectations, and scope before you do what we call a gap analysis or discovery analysis. And these are the steps we recommend. A strategy must be determined before the gap analysis is conducted. And then educate the CEO, the board, and the top management. Get the buy-in before you create the implementation plan and you put your systems in place. Document the process, roll out the system, conducting internal audits, and so on. So what do we recommend here? Strategies for 27001 implementation. Implement an integrated management systems approach. As I mentioned to you earlier, ISO 9001 is a good base to build on for 27001. Implement a good planning process for interested party expectations, planning, goals and objectives, and risk. We have a methodology called BOSS, which we think is very good for this. Conduct a process-based risk assessment. Incorporate your controls into your business processes. Very importantly, create a code of conduct, because how we behave in these processes, how we behave even at home when we call into a system is a key for information security management. Implement software to help you meet these standards. So an implementation plan example that has to come out from after your discovery, and a summary and key takeaways. Number one, get senior management involved. Top management's concern is long-term success to increase profit and decrease risks. Please let them know and understand the huge and grave risks to them in the marketplace without cybersecurity and information security. Produce a gap analysis as a starting point to understand what you need to implement. Gain a cross-functional support. It should not be siloed to one part of the organization. And you need to have a governance framework to support the organization's security practices. And that, keep in mind, an effective information security management system depends on awareness and acceptance across all parties. Number 4, develop a project plan with key project milestones, and then start somewhere and then continually improve. Folks, that is the webinar on ISO 27001. Just to let you know, there's a training that we do, implementations we do, audits that we do as Omnex in a number of different places. We are implementing cybersecurity both in products. Cybersecurity is becoming very, very important as we move into, more electronic hardware and software. And of course, the topic of today, information security management systems for the entire company. Dirk, with that, maybe we can take a few questions before we close this webinar.
Yeah, we can take a couple here. Okay. Our company has a software application that is implemented within a medical group or hospital environment. What part of ISO 27001 applies to us? For instance, patient information is sent to our application, but we are restricted within the IT environment.
So, if the question is what a 27000 applies to my organization, I think the answer is yes, your entire organization. Or are they saying, does our software, the question is not clear to me, Dirk.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess you can take it one of two ways. Yeah, your entire company should be covered by ISO 27001, right?
It's not just a software standard. Yeah, it's not just about that software. It is about the entire company. But also say this. There's also another risk, which is, since we work in the area of product, that they have to be very careful about the way they make their own product, because lots of times, if you're not very careful, malicious software is hidden in the software that we deliver.
Right.
Yeah, so there's both danger in software that you develop, and also, of course, the information security of the entire organization. That would be my answer.
Okay. Another question. If I'm using the client's VPN, is that okay?
As long as we're using a VPN. So let's say there's a VPN, and I don't know what you're using to get into the client's VPN. Even that is very, very important for you to know what is it you're using, so there's no risk involved there. But the key is that you should be using a VPN no matter where you are. And there's no automatic way to, for ourselves, we had to purchase VPNs for all the folks who are always on the travel.
Right, and just so people know, if those who aren't familiar, VPN stands for Virtual Private Network, and this is a secure way of communicating, typically within companies, or sometimes there's actually even VPNs that'll get you out to a website, but it's just another way of encoding and protecting your information.
So nobody really knows who you are.
Right.
And about you, so that they can't come in to and steal your identity or steal your data.
I had a question. This is more kind of an auditing question, Chad. So during an audit, for 27001, the auditors aren't looking specifically for what you have done technically, right, in terms of protecting your data. They're looking at, have you identified where the risk areas are at, and have you put something in place to address those risks? Do I have that kind of the basics of it there?
I'll just go a little bit more. There's a minimum set of expectations coming from Annex A. So they're expecting that you've implemented at least that. or something equivalent to that, or something for that area. And so the control needs to be adequate to the risk at hand. And then we'll check the practice to make sure it's being followed.
Okay. Now, my follow-up question on that then is measurement. So I understand measurement, let's say in terms of ISO 9001, you could measure, well, how many CAPAs have I issued, or how many complaints have I gotten from customers over time. What does measurement mean within the context of IT security? Measuring what?
So you start off with policies, then you have objectives for information security, and then so definitely you can measure all the objectives that you have. And then in the process itself, in the high-risk processes, you can have process measurables supporting your overall objective. So it's just like saying, I only have one objective. My PPMs have to be, I'm giving a quality analogy, 30 parts per, PPMs or less in a year. And that, of course, gets transmitted into a number of different metrics in the number of different processes to support it. Similarly, with information security, except you have more than one objective. You can have that I don't want to get hacked. You could have confidentiality objectives. You could have, availability objectives. You can have integrity objectives, right? And then those objectives then that you set supporting your policy gets implemented through processes. What are the processes? Based on your risk, you have to put controls in place so that these processes are not violated. So maybe a process measurement for Omnex might be to ensure that all our people use VPNs when they call into our system, right? So that could be a process measurement that we use.
Okay.
There's a slew of them, that comes out of it. Nothing pops to my head right away to give you 2 or 3 more examples. But process measurements will support your overall objective.
Okay. Just one last thing I just wanted to point out, because I think it was really important, is, I was thinking, for a small company, like let's say Quality Digest is a small company, technical applications to protect us and stuff, all this could be very complex and very expensive, and maybe not really feasible for a small company. But you said something I think was really important, which is that very often it's not so much the technical solutions, it's how you've trained your people to, how do you recognize a phishing attack? How do you protect your information? How are you using your computer? Where are you connecting to an open Wi-Fi? I mean, it's low-tech solutions, I think, that are, for a lot of companies, are really the key, I think, very often. Matter of fact, you mentioned that the IRS got hacked by a phishing attack, of all things, not anything really highfalutin.
Not really, it's just to give you a true close-to-home example of one of my customers. They're a smaller software company, and they have 100 different programmers, but they got hit on about 8 different computers. They actually had a ransom attack. That's what happens. So they tied up the code and asked for a bunch of money to release that software code. Okay.
Right.
And why only 8 or 9 of those machines? These 8 or 9 people were following some sloppy habit. I forget now exactly what they were doing. They had a habit of, and they were using a certain kind of software to do certain kind of something that let them open and vulnerable to get attacked, so they got attacked. And it's scary that this kind of a small company that makes software should get attacked, because there's a number of attacks going on when they're making a lot of money, a lot of which we don't know because people are loath to let other people know. Though the SEC now has decreed, if you do get attacked, you have to let, especially if it's traded in the stock exchange, you have to let people know, because it's a matter that affects the stock's value. So,
well, I think we're going to have to. I think we're going to have to wrap it up.
Yes. Dirk, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Chad. I appreciate your time today. Really, really important. It's really an important topic, and I think it's something that everybody can relate to. Thanks to all of you for joining us. You will be receiving an email with a link to a recording of this webinar, as well as a PDF of the slides from Omnex. So keep your eyes open for that email from Omnex. So from all of us here at Quality Digest and from Omnex, have a great day, and we will see you at the next webinar. Have a great day, and
Thank
we
you,
will
everyone.
see you at the next webinar. So long.